Thank you, thank you. Looks different from this angle. It's really been wonderful to be here. I've thoroughly enjoyed and gotten so much out of all the presentations so far. I think you'll see some similarities in the things I say. Ultimately, what we're talking about at all these different levels is how we work with people. They've given me power, which is this button, and I understand the top one, if I push it, you'll all be ejected from your seats. So let's, okay. I have to get used to using that, though. We'll talk a little bit about the individual side of things, because ultimately I think that's where things come down to. It's person to person. So, as we've heard these inspirational talks and this really moving, poignant kind of stories, ultimately those things go down to where people started having conversations with other people. I'm going to, I don't need to leave it on there. I also hang out with bears in the wild in Alaska, so it's another big interest of mine. I will be sharing just some tidbits, I guess you would call them, in terms of working with people. I have worked with people for a long time. I have done a lot of work with parents and children. And then once I started working with dog trainers, what I discovered as I attended some of my first conferences was something kind of familiar to me, because when people work with children, they will often say, I love the kids, the parents, not so much. Mostly because we don't always have the skills. I usually say the parents aren't always as cute as their children, but they have some of the same, very same needs that the kids have as well. And then I started going to dog training conferences as I was really trying to immerse myself in that world, and I heard the same thing. The dogs are great, I know what to do with them, but the people, I didn't count on that being part of the equation. But it is the huge part of the equation, as all the speakers, I think, that have come before me here have mentioned very clearly and have done a lot of good work. I'm going to start because the tasks that face us are overwhelming sometimes. I mean, if you think of all the things we've heard in the last few days, really overwhelming kinds of problems, and we think of the enormity of it, and you can get overwhelmed and become immobilized. And so Arthur Ashe has one of my favorite quotes to help me keep perspective, which is, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And we can't really ask too much more of ourselves. We may not, if we start off thinking, I have to change the world, we can end up being frozen. But if you start with thinking, what can I do right now with what I have, we can make a difference. And we've seen some great examples of that this morning, but also yesterday as well. I think we all can do better with our relationships and the way we treat animals. I think it's a learning curve that ends up in infinity somewhere. But I think there are also levels of poor treatment, and I'm going to just highlight a few of them, which would be abuse and cruelty, which we've seen plenty of examples of. I think the throwaway, giveaway mentality, those of you that work in rescue and shelters and those kind of things have seen plenty of that. Animals that are chained outside, owners that relinquish dogs for not very many good reasons from our point of view, just straight out neglect, one-way relationships, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and just everyday misunderstandings, because we are humans, we think like humans, we see the world through human eyes, we don't always think like horses, we don't always think like dogs, and they view the world and process the world in ways that are really quite different than we do. So we often sometimes intrude on their space. You know, I've seen lots of people, you know, the first thing they do when they see a horse is this. The first thing that kids do a lot with dogs is they wrap their arms around their necks. And those are things that dogs and horses don't really care for very much, but we don't know any better. It's human behavior. Maybe some of us know better, but that doesn't mean that the people in general have learned those kind of things. So we can actually intervene at all levels. And our focus today, of course, for me, is going to be individuals, families, and relationships that come. The picture is of my grandson when he was much younger. And he means well. He wants to hang out with one of my dogs. But she's showing a lot of stress signs there. And he doesn't know that. And I took a picture and then said, okay, let's do it a different way. but I take pictures sometimes when I probably should not be doing that. Anyway, I spend a lot of my life these days in animal-assisted interventions, and particularly in animal-assisted play therapy, which is a mental health intervention where we're really using play therapy and play as the primary means of developing relationship and solving problems that kids might have. And I'll talk a little bit about kids in general and kids in particular. I work a lot with kids who hurt animals. I'll get into that a little bit later. But what I find is even in the field of animal-assisted interventions, where most people mean well, they want to do good work, we see a lot of people that expect animals to just tolerate what we ask of them. Nobody has asked the animal, do you want to go to the hospital? Nobody's asked the animal if they want to go into some form of therapy with the kids. Sometimes they don't ask the kids either, or they don't ask adults. But I mean, we're there and we're expecting things of the animals. And I think sometimes we have blinders on because even then there's kind of this idea, oh, my dog loves to go visit. And I look at what that dog looks like, or I look at what that horse looks like. Doesn't look like it's loving it to me. In fact, quite the opposite. And then you see millions and millions of YouTube videos and pictures where we have these very intrusive kind of things going on, babies laid on top of dogs, kids riding a Rottweiler like it's a horse, things that are dangerous, not to mention unpleasant, for the animals. So even in my field with animal-assisted therapy, people need to have a greater awareness of what's going on for the animals when we're asking them to do something. What are their desires? What are their needs? It's actually a requirement of our program. My colleague in all this, Tracy Thompson, is here as well. We do things here and across the Atlantic and other places as well. But it's a requirement of our program that the animals don't just tolerate things, they actually have to enjoy things. And if they don't enjoy it too, then we don't do it. So that's sort of our philosophy. We want to give animals true choices. This is a horse that decided it wanted to go here. This is Tracy on her horse, one of her horses. And so we can't always give them choices for everything they might want to do because it might not be safe, but as much as possible, building choice into things is really very valuable. I like to quote myself. I'm not really the narcissist that might make me seem, but whenever we ask anything of our animals, we need to ask ourselves two questions. Why? Why am I asking that of my animal? And how well have I considered my animal's point of view? Now, that doesn't mean there aren't times we have to ask our animals to do something that maybe they wouldn't choose to do themselves, again, for safety purposes or welfare purposes. But for the most part, I think those are questions we should have in the forefront of our mind every time we ask for an animal to do something, whether it's working or as a pet or anything else. This is just a picture of my book. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is relationships, primarily today, is that all change occurs in a context. For change to occur, there has to be a context, and I think all the other presentations have really spoken to that beautifully. When it comes to people, that context usually is a relationship of some sort. And sometimes in our passions, to help the animals that we care so deeply about, we come on a little strong. We might actually do some things that are damaging to the relationships that we need in order to create that change. So again, I wrote this book to kind of help canine professionals, but actually everything in it is stuff I've learned about working with people. You could substitute the word horse, you can substitute a lot of different animal names, and the principles and the items in the book are really the same. I'm going to concentrate in the first part of my talk just on two things: developing good human relationships, and secondly, facilitating others, our clients or the people that we work with, their relationships with their own animals as a means of change. And then the last part of what I'm going to talk about will be kids, because they're the future, and I have a lot of passion for that. So we're going to talk a little bit about creating this context for change with our human-to-human connections. First of all, again, as I said, our passions can be self-defeating sometimes if we let them kind of, if you've spent any time on Facebook, you've seen it, where people are just like, you're doing this wrong, you shouldn't be doing it that way, and people get defensive and angry and really quite unpleasant. Is that going to create any kind of change in the person that you first criticized? Nah, it won't. If all it will do is they'll dig in deeper. So if we alienate people, we lose our chance. So key consideration, this is a very simple concept. You all recognize it, it's true because I've said so. But you don't know me, so you don't know my sense of humor. But anyway, it's really, we have to try to communicate in ways that minimize defensiveness. And that's really, if you just think about any communication that you have with somebody that you want to influence, you have to think first about how do I communicate what I need to communicate so they don't feel defensive. So some of the things that were all said yesterday about don't do it that way, don't do it this other way, you're wrong, you know, that's defensiveness material. Think through about how, if somebody was going to say something like that to you, how would you want to hear it? And we'll talk about some of that. Some of you, probably most of you, are familiar with cognitive dissonance, which is the basic idea where you have conflicting ideas held in your mind at the same time. Usually we have to resolve that. It creates some anxiety, so we resolve it. And usually we resolve it in the way of the old belief system rather than the new belief system. So we've talked about Cesar Millan here the first day, yesterday. And so if I go work with somebody who, I go into their home and I'm doing a behavior consult of some sort with their dogs, and they say, I just love him. I don't say, oh, he's terrible. And I don't say that anytime anyway, because that's going to push them back. They don't know me. They feel as though they do know him, and I agree that he does have really good people skills that people can relate to even through the television. So it's a matter of helping them say, well, you know, there are some things that he does that I do agree with that are very nice, and there's a few things I do differently. I don't have to take on whether he's good or bad or whatever. I have to create a relationship with that person, and I might not even have to say anything about it at all. I might say, what is it you really like about him? I did ask that of one client, and she said he has really white teeth and a great smile. So I got the toothpaste with the, you know. Anyway, but we're going to think about influence rather than control, because our own control needs play into this. And, you know, we want to do something that's good for the animals, but we can't control other people and have that happen. We have to influence them. We all have a need, we all have a need for control and predictability. Those are basic human mental health needs. But very often we try to control the wrong things, like our spouses, our children, the people we disagree with. All of that stuff is stuff that's a little bit out of our control, really. And so very often, our clients also have high needs for control. And a lot of the behaviors, a lot of the equipment we see people using with their animals, a lot of the, all the different things that we find kind of pretty aversive are usually based on people's control needs. So people do really unkind things to horses. Horses are really big. They might not ever say to us they're scary, but I'm really pretty convinced that horses, you know, people feel like I could be hurt by them. Same with dogs, you know, they have big teeth. And so when we're scared, it tends to bring out this control need we have. And then we do things that perhaps we wouldn't do otherwise if we weren't feeling fearful. So this morning when we were talking about how emotions are at the root of a lot of this, absolutely true, in my opinion. So even when people are motivated, though, they have trouble changing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But we have to find ways to enlist their cooperation. I'm not going to talk through this, but there's lots of factors that play into why people have the reactions that they do with their animals and with us as change agents or as potential change agents. The bottom one I'll put down, I have there is our relationship with them matters. There's really consistent research spanning probably since the 60s on psychotherapy. What makes psychotherapy effective? Because again, we're in the business of change. There's three things. This is no slide on this. One is basic competence in what you are trying to work with somebody about, you know, some basic knowledge about it. The second one is your enthusiasm for maybe what you're doing. So if you're not really in a good job for yourself, time to think about something you can be enthusiastic about and seek that out. So the passion is good in that regard. But third, and probably to me at the core of everything, is the relationship we have. So if we don't have a good relationship with the person, doesn't matter how competent we are, doesn't matter how motivated we are, it's not going to probably happen the way we want it to. So can we really change human behavior? This is a question that gets asked a lot. My belief is not much, unless the person wants to change. And again, we've had lots of presentations that kind of highlight that. I want you to think about the last time you tried to change something about yourself. You know, lose a little weight, quit smoking or drinking so much, or whatever it might be, and think about how easy that was for you. And that puts it in perspective, because that's what we're doing, is asking people to change from something they know well. Like many of the presentations have said, they're things that people have pride in, they feel good about themselves. And now we're saying, don't do that anymore. We have to put something else in place. We have to give them something else to feel good about. So I agree with all that too. And little glasses. I think I can see okay without them. Okay, so I think I've said enough about, just wanting to have a collaborative approach. But just as we try to do with animals, just think it's a parallel process with people. We are animals too, and we need to have that kind of gentler approach. So we need that safe context. There's an expert model that is often used in change. It's not very effective. We tend to say, okay, this is what you need to do, and go home and do it. I'll show you how to do it. Go forth and do it. And then you come back and say, and I'll say, how did it go? And you'll say, well, it didn't work very well. And then I'll say, oh, they're resistant. That's a loop that is not very helpful. It's a little overstated, but I've seen that over and over again when we're talking with people who get frustrated with working with people. The left side just highlights kind of the hallmarks of an expert model, which again is often the way we're taught and those kind of things. But it's a more passive approach. There's a collaborative model, which I think is much better, and several of you have discussed that in your prior discussions, in your presentations. This is all about partnership. And usually I approach it from the point of view of, yeah, I have some things I think I can share with you, but you know the situation way better than I do. So you tell me about that situation first, then we'll collaborate on thinking of what the solutions would be. I do want the solutions to come from people, but there's nothing really wrong with my suggesting something, but I have to have a relationship first. There has to be this understanding of where the other person is coming from with the whole thing, and then that has to be taken into account. So I'll let you just kind of skim over those kind of things too. But both of us are sharing information, but the first step is really understanding where are they coming from and establishing that I'm not here to tell you how to change your life. I can't do that anyway. Even if I did tell you how you should change your life, you're not, you have control over that. I don't. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about these features as being some of the key things to help human change occur. Listening, relevance, common goals, and action. Again, I'm not going to go through these in great detail because of the time frame, but I can't complain about the time frame because the people that only have 5 minutes and 10 minutes have a much bigger challenge than I've got. Empathy, we've heard it said before. It's absolutely, in my view, so critical for anything that we want to do. We have empathy for the animals. We want to look at the world through their eyes and see what is it like to be in their feet, in their shoes, or lack of shoes, as the case may be. But, we want to have that empathy for them, but we need to have it for these people too. Again, we've seen lots of great examples of that. Empathy to me is an attitude and a skill. So I talk about empathic listening. Empathy first is you clear your mind of your own thoughts and feelings, your own judgments, anything that you might have, your own expectations, and you really, truly try to get inside the heads of the other people, not in a psycho kind of way, not in a psychological kind of way, but you want to kind of just, what's the world like for this person who I'm talking with, and quit thinking about ourselves, quit thinking about the next things we're going to say, and just kind of try to hear what they have to say and see the world through their eyes. The skill part of it is often you listen carefully to both body language and the words that the person is telling you. And at that point, then, in your own words, very briefly, you just let them know what you understood. And if they've expressed a feeling, you actually acknowledge that. So you can say, it's really hard for you to think about changing anything here because you've done it this way for all these years. Or, you really love your dog, but your dog drives you crazy some of the time because of the way he or she behaves. So that empathy is a skill. It takes some time and practice to develop it and do it well so it becomes very natural. I hate it when people start saying, what I hear you saying is, that seems contrived. And it has to be a genuine, let me see if I get what you're saying to me. But I don't precede it with a lot of stuff, I just kind of say it. So the empathy also implies a certain action. So if I really am truly listening to somebody, they are going to say some things that might change my plans. So even if I go in with plans, and even if I do have some ideas, they're going to tell me, if I'm truly hearing them and wanting to kind of incorporate what they're telling me, I don't have to agree with them, but I have to try to see the world through their eyes. If I'm doing that well, I'm leaving myself vulnerable to making changes myself. So the relevance really speaks to what's in it for me. That came out, I think, in one of the question and answer periods yesterday, but we're very good at saying what's in it for the animals. You know, we care about these animals, and we're very good at saying, well, this will be better for your dog, this will be better for the elephant, this will be better for whatever animal we're talking about. We're not always so good at articulating what's in it for the person who we're trying to influence, the person we're trying to kind of help change their behavior. And this is not, to me, a manipulative process. If it becomes manipulative, it loses a lot of effectiveness. What it comes from is, if I listen carefully to you, and you tell me, I feel like I'm out of control of my animals, in my pets, in my house. They've taken over the house, they're doing this, that, and the other thing. That I need to understand that they feel out of control. So part of what I'm going to say about, well, when we talk about what the options might be, we need something that makes you feel a little bit more in control. Because if we can't do that, it's going to be undermined by anything that the person says. We do have to take the long view. Again, we saw some great examples of that this morning, where it's sort of like one step at a time. The old shaping principle in many ways, but it's just one step at a time in the right direction, rather than expecting that people are going to change like overnight, because that doesn't usually happen. We can also float ideas across people, which would be the idea of just saying, what if? You know, I'm wondering, would something like this make any sense at all? And then you can let them think about it and give their reactions to it without coming across as if you're telling people, you know, this is what you need to do. Let's try it. How about if we try this for a certain period of time, and then we'll come back and see whether it seems to have an impact or not. Does it meet your needs? Does it meet your animal needs? Those are all we kind of things, which we talked about a little bit yesterday. We can set it up for success. We're always looking for not just how do we set the animal up for success, but the person. Offering our support and coaching. You know, just being there is important. Absolutely, humor is a big, big part of it. Mark Twain said, what did he say? He said a lot of really good things. Against the assault of laughter, nothing can stand. So that humor that binds us, that makes us kind of lighter, not sarcastic humor, generally doesn't fly really well unless you know somebody really well, but affirming humor really makes a big difference. So when we're trying to we work with the person to create that relationship. The other thing that I like to do to help create human behavior change is to facilitate the human-animal relationship itself. So how can I help that person get along better with their animal? Most people, especially in the pet keeping world, get pets because they want a companion. They want, you know, if you stop and ask people, what were you hoping for when you first got this animal? They'll tell you what their hopes and dreams were that may have been dashed along the way because the animal has behavior problems, or, you know, it's been very costly for one reason or another. Perhaps for me, you know, this is one of the things that, what were you hoping for? And then how do we try to make that? Is it possible to have that, as long as it's not really unrealistic expectations? So one of the things that I find is, it's what changed me the most back in time to really start to look at things from the animal's point of view. And I do it all the time with any clients I have, and also the people that I train to do animal-assisted therapy, is learning about body language in animals. We've learned a lot from ethologists along the way, among others, about what different body language means. And if we can help people see it for themselves, I don't have to convince them that something's going wrong. If I can show them, boy, your dog is showing whale eye and turning away and doing all these different behaviors that signal a lot of stress, then they start seeing it for themselves, and the motivation is there for them to change. And then I'm in a position to be able to say, we've all made mistakes. Yeah, you feel bad now that you see how your dog is reacting to things. We've all made mistakes along the way. I have too, and believe me, I have. And but what we have from today forward, and let's see if we can kind of find ways to kind of build your relationship so that your dog isn't feeling quite so uncomfortable, your horse isn't kind of rushing by you every time you open the gate, whatever it might be, that the horse feels safer with you. So we can look at that body language as an eye-opener for people that doesn't require us to insert information except to educate about the body language. Just helping people learn about development and socialization in animals. Of course, many of you probably do some of this. Learning about natural behavior, because very often we're asking animals to do things that aren't so natural. Just basic behaviorism in terms of how do we make behavior change. And again, the relationship. I think attachment theory that we talk about with humans actually applies to our relationship with animals. I see more and more research heading in that direction. Okay. Toward Rugas, I like this quote from her a lot. Life is no obedience exercise, it's a way of living together. This particularly pertains to pet animals, dogs, horses, cats, other rabbits, other animals we might keep as pets. I like this idea because it's broader than we just train. I do train my animals, but it's 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. They know to be polite to go out the door so they're not getting into scraps as they head out the door together. But most of the time we're just hanging out. We're having fun. I watch them play. There's all those pieces. So I want to talk a little bit about children because I think they are the future and they don't have a lot of unlearning to do. And so sometimes, and I know a lot of you are working with children. I've heard about some of the really great programs you're doing. Just want to talk a little bit about children and animal welfare. This is a quote from James Garbarino, who has studied youth violence for about 35 years in the US and beyond. This is a quote from his book, Lost Boys, but the same thing actually applies to girls. He's written lots of books about girls as well. But because we know that empathy is the enemy of aggression and that depersonalization is the ally, all efforts at moral rehabilitation of violent and troubled boys hinge upon cultivating empathy and fighting against their tendency to depersonalize others. So there's things that I'll see again in the animal-assisted therapy world where people are painting their horses in they're beautiful paintings, but you kind of think, well, that seems to me a little bit like depersonalizing the horse. Because the horse is a canvas rather than a living sentient being, where as somebody interacting with a horse I have a picture that I didn't put it in here because it's not my own, but the horse has been turned into a giraffe. That to me, it seems simple compared to some of the things that you all are working with. It might seem like kind of a mundane thing, but to me, that is a depersonalization of the animal, and I think we need to think more about what we do, whether we're doing animal-assisted therapy or whether even if we're helping people and their families with their pets. For enhancing empathy, there's different thoughts about whether empathy can actually be developed, but it is within us. It's within the people that we work with. Most people are really good people and they want to do right. It's good to teach and give information. All the things on the left, I won't need to go through them. Those are good methods, but we need even better methods if we're going to really make change, true behavior change, and that is live experience with animals. I work with kids who hurt animals, and very often we'll get referrals from somebody who says, oops, sorry, I usually have a stand-up and walk around kind of mic. Where they'll say, oh, this child has hurt animals, so we won't have any kind of animal-assisted therapy done. Now, I'm not talking about visitation programs and volunteer programs because I wouldn't want or expect a volunteer who's not a mental health professional to know how to work with that. I mean, that is part of trauma and attachment problems in kids, and it's a pretty serious problem. But at the same time, how can kids ever learn better behaviors with animals if they don't actually eventually have the experience of doing that. So, but it has to be controlled. It has to be a process that's therapeutic in nature. And, but I do think it's important that they learn how to create relationship with an animal. Once they can create that relationship and see it as a living, sentient being, then they're not going to be depersonalizing it. And we know that depersonalization is a large part of abuse. Modeling. Our own behavior matters. So if I am doing animal-assisted work, or if I'm doing any kind of training work, if I'm choking on a choke chain, or using prong collars, or any of those kind of things, which I think are more common in the U.S. than they are here, but maybe not, I don't know. I know the shock collars are not nearly as common here as they are in the U.S. What kind of message is that? I did a consult with somebody who works in a center where children go in to report their abuse. Somebody's reported abuse, the children are brought there to talk about what their abuse has been. And they had a dog in the waiting room with a shock collar on, and it's a shock collar so the dog wouldn't bark. So just think about the message of that. You come to a place where they want you to tell what your story is, tell the bad things that happened to you, which is scary enough for kids to do. It's scary to go through it. It's even really scary to talk about it. And so they see a dog who has a voice, goes bark, and then they'll say, what is that thing on the dog's neck? And kids notice those kind of things. They'll figure it out. It's a horrible, horrible message. And I often say when I'm trying to change people's attitudes about the equipment that they might be using is, yes, it's for the dog, it's also for the clients that we might work with in terms of humans. Because, again, what message are we giving to any child in any home where aversive equipment is being used? Because it's not the message probably we want for the sake of behavior change in a welfare, in a more positive direction. Capturing empathy when it occurs. Very often kids will do really empathic things. A little boy I worked with had a horrific history of his own. We worked a lot with my dog. He connected with my dog. He learned to really read dog body language and understand her feelings, and he made great progress. The school kept saying, I really want this kid we need this kid to have more empathy. He seems kind of cold. And he was developing it. He's on his way to school. He finds a rabbit who has been hurt, perhaps by just part of a leg was injured or was bleeding, maybe got hit with a lawnmower or something like that. So he picks up, not the best judgment maybe, but he picks up the rabbit, took it to school, took it to the school nurse, and said, I found this rabbit. And they kicked him out of school for 3 days. So, I understand the school's point of view. They're worried about disease and all those kind of things. But, I talked with the school and we discussed that, but I keep thinking that as a society, but also sometimes as individuals or even as parents, we're good at noticing the problems, not so good at noticing when they're actually doing what we want them to. Sometimes we get those blinders on again. He's a bad kid. And he had been a bad kid, so that's what they saw, and he was breaking the rules as opposed to recognizing that was actually empathic behavior. Now I was able to work with him through that and say, I know you did something really, really nice, which you cared about that rabbit, and you took it to a grown-up, but let's think about it. If it happened again, what are the alternatives? Maybe leave it there and go tell an adult. May or may not get any kind of action, but at least I'm helping him be acknowledged for the good behavior he had, at the same time helping him learn, what can he do that will fall within a way that increases the chances that something positive will happen for the rabbit and for him. And so they can develop actual relationships and then learn to generalize it. There's some research I'd like to see more in terms of looking at kids in particular, but certainly adults, it's interesting too. If we can generate some kind of empathy for an animal, does it then translate in terms of empathy for other people, as in the link, in terms of the link between animal abuse and human abuse? Wrote another book, although we have another one coming that'll eventually replace it. This is more specifically about using play with kids. I have here, and if anybody wants this, I think there's a video being made, but if anybody wants the PowerPoint, I'm glad to send it to you by email. I just have to be a little careful about some privacy issues. I have permissions to do certain things with it and certain not other things because I have some client information in it. But this is the point I already made, which is about how we have to think about how our relationships with animals affect even what other people might react to from them. Okay, so kids who hurt animals, just have a little bit more here. In foster care, most of the kids I've worked with have been in foster care. They might be adopted, but they almost all have maltreatment histories. Not always, but almost always have maltreatment histories. Some of them, I've had a couple clients through the years who were threatened by fighting dogs. So they lived in a home where somebody was using fighting dogs, and then when the kids misbehave, they say, I'm gonna sick the dogs on you. So, the dogs they become fearful of dogs, and I do a lot of work with kids that are fearful of dogs too for various reasons. Some have had pets taken or killed, which is not all that unusual in domestic violence situations, and now they're engaging in harmful behaviors with animals. I do like to work with kids who haven't had this history and help them learn kind behaviors with animals and to recognize animal feelings and so forth, but this is really of great interest to me just because they're a little bit harder to reach, but not impossible. So what we've done is a lot of animal-assisted play therapy work. You can look at my websites or whatever if you're interested in more about that. But a large part of what we do in animal-assisted play therapy, in addition to working with the children's own feelings and issues and dilemmas and creating, safety relationships with foster carers or whomever, we want to help them. I help the kids understand body language and emotions. We show them appropriate ways of interacting safely. The first thing I do with any child that I work with is teach them how to meet and greet a dog safely, and that includes approaching a dog not this way, but how do we approach a little bit from the side, how do we reach down, we might touch a shoulder or a neck, but also how to ask permission from the dog, which I'll talk about in just a second. But how do we build healthy two-way relationships? So if the animal says, nope, not interested in participating in that, and the kids are disappointed, that's the stuff I work with. Yeah, you really feel bad, you wanted to really work with the dog, but she just seems kind of tired today, or what do you suppose is up with that? So we just help them. Very often when I'm working with kids, and this isn't just in therapy, I do it when I'm acting as a dog trainer too. I don't do the two simultaneously with the same family. It's a dual relationship, but I do separate work with both. And I might just say, hey, I noticed when you bent over and you came on really loud that the dog just backed up. What do you suppose is up with that? I want to pull it out of them to kind of see what they think has happened. Other times they might not get it. They might not understand what's up with that. So I might just say, when you bent over and made that loud noise and the dog backed up and I saw her ears kind of go down, I think she's a little bit afraid. What do you suppose we can do to make her feel better? So again, I'm always, as much as possible, trying to pull out of the child, although you can do the same method with adults, of what can we do, how can we behave differently so the dog doesn't feel that way. And if you are consistent about that, and then I work with parents, I do a lot of work with families to help them reinforce all that, and sometimes the parents in those families need help with those kind of behaviors as well. Clinical results, now this is not a very big N, and it's just clinical results. It's not research results. I'd love, if anybody's looking for a good project, might have one for you with cooperative therapists. There's been 40 cases of child abuse that I've either dealt with directly myself or supervised. And the way we've, or not child abuse, but of animal abuse, they've been abused, kids too, mostly. And the way we know that they're harming pets is usually the foster families, the foster carers, or the adoptive families have pets of their own, and they say they're messing around with the dogs, they're pulling their ears, they're hiding them in closets, or worse. All of them have stopped harming pets after we do animal-assisted play therapy work where they actually get to have a relationship with the pet. If it's therapeutically indicated, I will work with them and their pet from home, or I'll refer them to somebody else who can teach them how to interact, as in terms of dog trainers. But, research project to anyone, please talk to me. These are goal areas that we have when we do animal-assisted play therapy. I'm not going to dwell on these, but these are the goals I think we need to have if we want to have kids who develop healthy relationships with animals, respectful relationships with animals. Part of it is self-efficacy, learning just how to train a dog in very simple kind of ways. I don't like overtraining dogs. There's a phrase that we often use, leave some doggy in the dog, leave some horsey in the horse, because we want them to be who they are. We want them to be honored and accepted for who they are as animals, as individual, unique animals. Not just the breed, but the whole, who is this particular dog? But learning to do a little bit of training. This is a boy who was doing a little bit of eye contact training. He's reaching for a treat at the moment with my dog in a therapy session. This kid also had a history of hurting animals and stopped entirely by report of the foster family. Attachment, before you can really have a good relationship with somebody else and feel caring for someone else, you have to feel cared for. A lot of the kids you might work with have never had that experience. So that's one thing that animals actually bring to it, but they might not have ever had that real experience. So we play hide and seek. The dogs love doing it. My dogs love doing it. Not all dogs would, and I wouldn't ask them all to do it. But the kids might hide. The dog goes find them. The kids feel like, oh, that dog found me. And they feel good about that, and that's part of the relationship building on that side. On the other side is caregiving behaviors, which we will talk about, how you might groom the horse, how you might wash the horse's tail, how you might ensure the welfare of another. I mean, there's a lot to this, which I'm just kind of covering the surface. We do a lot of self-regulation work, so in terms of impulse control and bad impulse, a lot of kids do bad things because they're playing with the dog scratches them, and they lash out, and then the dog gets hurt, and then they've got a kind of a bad cycle there. So we talk a lot about how do we manage those situations so they don't get over-aroused. And we don't talk about it, we do it. We do activities that will encourage that. And then problem resolution, we cover there's different games, activities, interventions we can do for all of those. Treatment process, I'm going to go through this not from a treatment point of view, but there's things in this that you could easily do with any child that you're interacting with, including your own, that might be helpful, but they might be helpful for adults as well. First of all, always comes first, safety of self and animal. And it's not an either or. Very often I see discussions like, well, who do you keep safe first, your child or the animal? Well, I want them both to stay safe, and most of the time I want to set up the situation so they're not even in that boat. But I can set a limit with a child and say, no, don't do that. Or I can also, if it's an urgent situation, or I teach all my dogs a behind cue. So if I want to get them out of a situation, it's an emergency cue, and I just say, carry behind. And she knows to come behind me so I can get that situation stopped before it goes too far. I think a lot of observations are very valuable. Like, let's just watch for a while and see what happens. How to interact in a play-based way, 3-second rule. How many of you are familiar with the 3-second rule, a 3-scratch rule? One of the most valuable things, if you want to know the animal's point of view, in a nutshell, if you want to scratch the animal or touch the animal or pet the animal or whatever, do it for 3 seconds. Just, like say you're on the side of a neck of something, 1, 2, 3, and stop and watch what the animal does. And the animal will probably either stay there or maybe nudge you, like, more please, or they might turn away and walk away. So, and then if they stay there and they don't look, no stress signals or whatever, you can try it a little bit more, 1, 2, 3. And then you start getting a feedback loop in that relationship between the child or the adult. I do it with my own dogs all the time. One of my dogs was a feral dog. She lived for 2 months in the woods as a puppy. Highly traumatized dog. That's my other interest, is I work a lot with really traumatized, shut down dogs. And their safety comes first. So you have to try things, and it doesn't even involve touching some of the time. And they will tell you that's okay or it's not okay. Now, if they walk away, it doesn't mean they didn't like it. It might mean they just had enough of it. They didn't want any more of it. But I think it's a matter of just being really sensitive to it. The other thing is, and I don't think I have it on here, but it's kind of related, try this with an animal at home. If it's a well-socialized animal, pat yourself on the head. Just see what that feels like. How good does that feel? Okay. You got your own built-in drum here. Okay, now notice how that felt. Now just massage yourself in the head. And then imagine somebody else doing those two things to you. How good is the patting? Patting is really human. We pat each other on the shoulders, we pat each other on the backs, we pat our babies to help burp them. It's okay for humans, especially if we know them fairly well. I mean, if I went around patting all of you, you might not appreciate it, but that's the thing. You can ask an animal and say, how well do you like this? Watch the Olympics and the horses. You know, do the horses look like they like it? They may have learned to put up with it, but I think if you do that 3-second rule, you will learn massive amounts. My dogs have taught me so much. I also have cats, but especially the feral dog taught me because I could do that 3-second rule, and she would say, okay, that's fine, I'll stay here. Or she'd walk away, or she'd run away, and then I'd know she really didn't like something. Great thing for everybody to know, just to start getting that input back from the animals in the same way that, so I teach these kind of things to people in a way that then they get the information directly from the animal. I don't have to interpret for the animal nearly as much. How to teach positive training methods, watching and responding to animal emotions, just watching, you know, we are pretty bad sometimes. They're far better at understanding our emotions from our behaviors and minute little things than they are the other way around. And I always do family involvement. I want the whole family to be involved in whatever we might be doing, and then helping transfer to home. There's some websites there. This is not the American spelling of adaptations. It was a typo. I'd like to present it that way, but it's not. There's enough Americans here that would say, no, it's not. But you, as anybody that's wanting to intervene with a family or work with families or kids or individuals of any kind, all of these kind of things can just be adapted very easily. It's not something you have to preserve for therapy. We do have a certification program, a pretty rigid kind of thing. This was an equine program I did with a group of college students for transitions. Their favorite thing was running with the horses. I mean, we did all kinds of activities that were really cool. They're all ground-based. Their favorite thing was this really free kind of let's just run with the horses. So sometimes we have to build that into the relationships we're helping our clients build as well. These are some programs with permission of the clients, some from Tracy's program up in Northumberland, and just, you know, helping kids, how do we have polite behaviors with animals. The dog, Curie, was waiting for the puppet show to begin. There was actually nothing going on back there. There's no one even behind there, but she really likes puppet shows. And finally, Curie, there's an on-light, off-light for kids that are afraid of the dark. We play a game that allows that to happen. And then just creating, this is the same grandson growing up a lot better. He's got much better behaviors with dogs now. He's not doing anything that's stressful. That's not a stressed out dog. If you want to contact me for any reason. And that's the end of the PowerPoint. I don't know how much time we have. Do we have, there's an activity.